My Govanen Melonin, and well met indeed. I am Arachia Galadirthan, head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer, and welcome back to another Lore meets Faction overview, as we discuss both the factual and lore-based history of a certain faction from Divide and Conquer, and then pause and talk in the second half of what we've changed in Divide and Conquer to make that faction more suited to a total war setting. And today, we cover my absolute favourite faction and favourite thing in the entire Legendarium, and that is, of course, the great nation city, nation's not the right word, the great city of Dol Amroth. So, let's dive straight in. Dol Amroth's founding is one mired in mystery, I'm afraid, which is a great shame because I'd love to know more about it. But, essentially, the area that would become Dol Amroth was first settled by the elves, Sindar elves to be precise, mixed with Sylvan elves sometime later, but the Sindar as they fled from Beleriand at the end of the First Age. And they settled just north of what would become Dol Amroth, in a place that came to be known as Etheland. Now, Etheland literally translates as Elf Haven, so that is exactly what it was. It was a port town in the Cobus Haven, which is a bay on the northern side of the Bay of Belfalas, which the river Morthond flows into. So there's people or beings living in the Dol Amroth area, at least since the time of the end of the First Age, if not before, because let's not forget that Gondor is also populated by a lesser form of men, those of course that are not taken to Numenor and ascended to become Dunedain or Numenorians. So it is also plausible, though not written, that Dol Amroth may well also be populated just by indigenous peoples, but we have no idea if that is true. It's certainly plausible, highly plausible, given the merger of Dunedain and lesser men blood that Gondor became, a melting pot, a joining of those two cultures. So it's plausible that humans lived there first, and then the elves arrived at the end of the First Age. Now, the elves didn't really do anything other than live on the coast and establish this town. They do not factor into the histories at all for some considerable time, until, of course, Amroth comes to the fore, but we're not dealing with that just yet. The founding of Dol Amroth itself is most likely linked to an unnamed faithful Númenórean family who had ties and links with Elendil. So just before the downfall of Númenor, the Akalabeth, the great end to the Second Age, a family of faithful fled Númenor and settled near the elves in what would become Dol Amroth. Now, no name at this time is given to the city or the town, or indeed the fortress or castle that Dol Amroth is based around. But they settled there first, and these could be said to be the first, as we say, the founders of Dol Amroth. So the elves settled in the area, likely second after the indigenous humans, but then the Númenóreans finally arrive just before the end of the Second Age. They, of course, set up and now found Dol Amroth, and it begins its history with Gondor, because shortly thereafter Númenor falls, and the rest of the faithful in the 9 ships sail from the sunken island, and they set up Gondor and Arnor. And so Dol Amroth is absorbed into the southern realm. But the reason I say it's shrouded in mystery is because some 2004 years later, a gentleman comes into the picture called Galador, son of Imrahil the Númenórean. And Galador is said to be the first prince of Dol Amroth. Now, we know that Dol Amroth is ruled by princes. It's pretty much the only thing that anyone knows about Dol Amroth, if they've not looked into Dol Amroth, is that they have a prince. It's what they're almost known for. And Galador's the first to take the title. Now, in Unfinished Tales, Christopher Tolkien suggests that given that Dol Amroth is not given its name until 1981 years into the Third Age, so about 20 years before Galador is born, it is suggested that Galador, it's not important that he's the first prince, but rather it's important that he's the first prince of Dol Amroth. So there may well have been previous princes to Galador, and thus the founders, if you will, of Dol Amroth, but they wouldn't have been princes of Dol Amroth because it wasn't called that until 1981 of the Third Age, when Amroth famously possibly perishes and the city takes his name, or the hill takes his name. So that's why it's a bit mired in mystery, because Galador is said to be the first prince of Dol Amroth, which to a casual glance would suggest he's the first, therefore the first ruler of a newly created city. But with some further digging, it seems to be that actually he's just the first prince once the town is renamed, and actually Dol Amroth is founded way back at the start of the Third Age, with the faithful Númenórean family coming just before Númenor sinks into the sea. Unfortunately, though, the history between Galador and that family coming from Númenor of Dol Amroth is essentially unknown. Their story and their battles are very much intertwined, of course, with the Gondorians at that time. Dol Amroth doesn't really have any particular point in the story in the entire first 2,000 years of the Third Age, until, of course, Amroth and Nimrodel. So Amroth and Nimrodel are king. He's a king of Lothlorien, and she doesn't want to stay in Middle-earth anymore, but he would quite like to stay as the king of Lothlorien. But they come to an accord, and eventually they agree to leave Middle-earth, and they do so by way of Etheland, which remains an elven port right up until this time. And as I say, the Sylvan elves of Lothlorien, once they've mingled with the Sindar and they know about the great land of Aman, because of course the Sylvan elves, slight tangent, but the Sylvan elves never made it past the Misty Mountains. So they've never been to Valinor. They didn't take part in the First Age, in any of the events of the First Age, and their only knowledge of what Arome's great travels actually led to, all those thousands of years earlier, is what they are told by the Sindar who are fleeing Beleriand. Because, of course, the Sylvan elves come to be ruled by the Sindar, and the most famous of these are Galadriel, Celeborn, Thranduil, and Orofer. And the Sindar take up lordly titles, and they actually rule over the Sylvan elves. And over time, the Sylvan elves begin to abandon Middle-earth as well, and they do so through Etheland, and many of them come from Lothlorien. And Amroth and Nimrodel are some such. Now, both of those are Sindar, though, but it's just proving that Etheland still has an elven population even this late into the Third Age. So only about 1,000 years before the War of the Ring. But Amroth goes to Dol Amroth first. I don't know why they don't go alone, why they don't go together. And he arrives in Dol Amroth no trouble, and he awaits Nimrodel, who was coming with her own party. Now she, unbeknownst to Amroth, is waylaid in the White Mountains, where she is slain. We assume. He obviously never finds this out, and he just simply waits and waits and waits and waits and waits. And eventually those that are with him say, we can wait no longer, we have to set sail. We can't wait for her. And he steadfastly says no, and he requires that they will wait until Nimrodel is found. Of course, she's not found, and a great wind sweeps Amroth's boat and ship, out into the great ocean. And seeing that all is lost, and that the ship cannot make it back to the shore, he dives from the prow of the ship and begins to swim back to Dol Amroth, and he is never seen again. So it's suggested that he dies, although given that he's an elf, I suppose he may be just still out there trying to swim against the current, forever locked in a battle against nature. But I doubt it, because even elves would succumb to fatigue. So he's probably dead. And after this event, the great hill of Dol Amroth, and then thus the city, takes his name. And this happens in the year 1981 of the Third Age, as I say. Now, the Third Age is 3,019 years long, so we're a little over halfway through it when Amroth is lost at sea. Amroth's being lost at sea also marks the end of elven settlement in Etheland, for the ship that he was on was the last that set sail from the port, and it contained the last of those that actually lived there. So with the renaming of Dol Amroth to Dol Amroth, that also marks the end of an elven presence in Belfalas, or on the peninsula of Belfalas. And this is where then Galador finally comes into the fray. Now, to discuss Galador a little bit more, as I say, his father was called Imrahil the Númenórean, and all we really know of Imrahil is his name, his epithet, and the fact that he married an elf. So Galador is fully 50% elven. The other 50% is likely to be, of course, Númenórean, because Imrahil has the name the Númenórean, but remember, it has been 2,000 years since Númenor sank beneath the sea, and there's a strong chance Imrahil's bloodline has been watered down. We can't say that for certain, that is merely conjecture. But Galador is likely 50% elven and then 50% a mix of what they are called middlemen, are those who are non-Gondorians but also not Easterlings. Essentially those that didn't go to Númenor all were grouped together to become middlemen. So Imrazor's blood is something of Númenorian and something of middlemen. And he marries Mithralas, as we say, an elven lady, and Galador is the product of that, and he becomes the first prince of Dol Amroth. Now, it does suggest that there's suggestion, that those that actually settled in Dol Amroth never intermarried with the middlemen, and indeed only the majority of the Gondorians actually ever watered their bloodline down. So it's possible he is 50% pure Númenorian and 50% pure Elven. But Galador, as I say, is the first prince, and he is the first of 21 princes. Until we arrive, of course, at everyone's favourite prince, the 22nd Prince of Dol Amroth, Imrahil. So I suppose Galador is actually the first of 20 many princes, but because the line just keeps going and going and going and going and going. But the last named prince we have is the 23rd, if I am not mistaken. But Imrahil is the 22nd. Now, of course, Dol Amroth does feature in the histories between Galador and Imrahil, because, of course, Imrahil is present at the War of the Ring. But Dol Amroth's their history is very much intertwined with Gondor. They take part in the same wars that Gondor does. There's not too much of note to say about Dol Amroth within that time. So we'll briefly touch on Imrahil, and then we'll talk about Dol Amroth as a society a little bit more, and then we'll jump over to the other half. So Imrahil is arguably the most famous man of Dol Amroth, and this is purely because he's present at the War of the Ring. Imrahil is famous for two things. Number one, being incredibly brave, and number two, being the brother-in-law of Denethor, would be my suggestion. Because, of course, Imrahil's sister Finduilas marries Denethor and gives birth to both Boromir and Faramir, and then she shortly passes away. So Imrahil is the brother-in-law of Denethor. And he leads a contingent of knights of the Silver Swan Knights, call them what you will, the name's amazing, and 700 soldiers from Dol Amroth to Minas Tirith at the Great Battle of the Pelennor Fields and the Siege of Minas Tirith. He also takes on the great mantle of being the temporary steward of the city when Denethor becomes dead and Faramir becomes incapacitated, and so Dol Amroth rules over all of Gondor for a very brief period. And the only reason that I always remember this fact is because it's noted in the book, and I'm afraid I've not got the direct line. I've not got the line from the book, but it's noted that the banner of this Prince of Dol Amroth flies atop the White Tower of Ecthelion, denoting that Imrahil has taken up the stewardship of the city. But he is particularly brave, and he leads several sorties and charges from Minas Tirith to save various persons. The first of which, of course, is Faramir, because Faramir had received mortal wounds in the defence and retreat from the Pelennor forts. So they retreated from Osgiliath, and then they're defending the Pelennor line, the forts that guard the farmlands of Minas Tirith. And Faramir is bringing all of the men back orderly and whatnot, and he is beset upon by enemies. And so Gandalf and Imrahil and his knights charge out to save Faramir, and they bring him back to the city safely. The second time that Imrahil ventures outside the city again is to save or to fight with the Rohirrim, which also goes along at the same time that Aragorn lands at the Harlond and joins in as well. So it's kind of like the final saving of the city. Imrahil partakes in and ensures the garrison rallies out to defend Minas Tirith on the plains. Imrahil recognises that Aragorn is the rightful king almost immediately, but he essentially bows to Aragorn from day one. And his part in the story is then one of advice and counsel toward Aragorn and the captains of the West, as they are called, when they discuss what should they do in order to try and save Frodo. So that's Imrahil, and that's Dol Amroth's part in the War of the Ring, being badass knights who happen to be arguably Gondor's most elite military contingent. Now, Dol Amroth itself, as an actual city, is famous for two things, if you apologise with the list format. Number one, swans, and number two, the Great Seaward Tower, or the Tirith Ayar. Now, the Swan link is, I can only assume the swans lived there forever since Dol Amroth was founded, and so they became so intertwined with the city, because you will, of course, note that the banner of Dol Amroth is a swan, or a ship in the shape of a swan. Their ships have swan prows, and in almost anything ever, their knights tend to be called Swan Knights or Knights of the Silver Swan. But it's very possible that that last bit is purely modern, like gaming, for example, and storytelling, and that actually nowhere in the real story are they called Swan Knights. But anyway, it's almost synonymous with Dol Amroth at this point. But, so there's swans, which is one thing. And then, as I say, the Tirith Ayar. It's one of the only things we actually know about the city itself, is that it has this great tower. Now, it's arguably that it is kind of like a precursor to a lighthouse, because it's said that the bell of the Tirith Ayar is used to the city runs its life around the ringing of the bells of the Tirith Ayar, and also it's there to assist the ships. Now, given that Dol Amroth is a small promontory that juts out from the side of the peninsula of Belfalas, it is arguable that the Tirith Ayar is in some way positioned to assist ships with the rocks. I've always assumed that, but it is purely an assumption, i.e. conjecture. Another thing that Dol Amroth is perhaps lesser known for, but is known for, is that they are second only to the elves in their ability to play harps, which is something a little minor, I would suggest, but it's something worth noting anyway. Music is said to be abundant in the city of Dol Amroth, and they are never for want of it. You will also have noted that at certain times I've used the word castle and other times I've used the word city, and this is because Dol Amroth itself is, of course, the actual name of the geographical location of the small promontory that sticks out of the peninsula. It is called Dol Amroth, which literally translates as the hill, or more accurately, the head of Amroth, or Amroth Head, or Amroth Hill. Now, for those of you that are unfamiliar with the term head meaning something geographical, it literally just means a headland, a piece of land that sticks out from the mainland and breaks up the ocean, therefore. Almost like someone's just tacked on a bit of land to a main shape. And so that's generally what it means in very layman's terms. But Dol is also translated as hill, of course, places like Dol Guldur, meaning hill of sorcery. So it's an interchangeable meaning. And then, of course, it's named after Amroth. But atop this hill, or this head, is a great castle. And that is what most people refer to when they say Dol Amroth, the castle of Dol Amroth. But there is also a city then that has built up around that. And so that's Dol Amroth's geography, and kind of the only thing we really know about their society. The final things to say are that Belfalas, which I've mentioned a few times, translates as Great Coast or Great Shore, and is named as such because obviously the large peninsula that juts out into the Belagair, which means Great Ocean. It's a huge piece of coastland because it juts out into the sea, and that's why it takes the name Belfalas. Also, on the peninsula of Belfalas is a land known as Dor en Ernil, which means Lands of the Prince, and is so named because of the Prince of Dol Amroth. So again, we could therefore assume, or surmise is probably a better word, that it has only been called Dor en Ernil since at least the time of Galador, if he is the first prince, or if he is just merely the first prince of Dol Amroth. It is all down to each person to decide. So that is pretty much it for Dol Amroth, I'm afraid. There is not really that much known, sadly. We know a few characters, they pop up in the history a few times, but overall they are a massive minor sub-faction. And faction's not even really the right word when talking about it from a lore perspective, because they're not really a faction, it's just a city in Gondor that has a bit more pull than the other cities in Gondor. And that's it. But I do hope you may have learned something from this first bit about Dol Amroth. And now, as usual, we'll jump over to Divide and Conquer side, and I'll tell you what we've changed up for the faction in the game. Welcome then to Divide and Conquer's Peninsula of Belfalas, represented, if I do say so myself, particularly well. Even has the little notch in the bottom here next to Methras. So just to give you a better visual depiction of what we're discussing, this is indeed a head, so a jut of land sticking out of the main body of land, which of course is Dol Amroth itself, the head or hill of Dol Amroth, and atop it is the city. To the north, at the mouths of the Morthond River, is Theland, which is indeed an elf haven in Divide and Conquer as well, which is a nice little touch. So, of course, one of the major differences between Dol Amroth as they are and Dol Amroth in DaC is that, of course, we represent them as a sub-faction of Gondor, and their holdings stretch beyond the mountains of Belfalas, or the lands of the Prince, Dor in Ernil, over all the way to western Lebanon, with the town of Lynn here. We also add in the castle of Methrast on the southern tip of the peninsula of Belfalas. Otherwise, though, the main difference, or not main difference, but the key feature of Dol Amroth is a better word, is that we've represented them as the elite military faction of Gondor. We've taken this from the fact that the 700 men that they take to the Battle of Minas Tirith, and indeed the knights that Imrahil commands, represent the best that Gondor has to offer, and so that's what we've done with their whole roster. So the units that Dol Amroth can call upon, if we call them up, are all generally better than their Gondorian counterparts, if indeed they have a counterpart, but they cost a bit more and they take longer to recruit. So they represent this elite unit, as I say. Another key change is that, of course, this takes place in 2980. So rather than Imrahil being the faction leader, Bill Nighy is, Prince Adrahil is, and he is yet to die, because I believe he dies, it's off the top of my head I'm afraid, but I'm pretty sure he dies either this very year or in 2985, but it's somewhere very, very close to here. Oh no, doesn't he die in like 3010 or something like that? So Imrahil's actually only been the prince for a short time. I think that's more correct. Yes, because I'm mixing him with Thengel, because Thengel dies in 2980 and Theoden becomes the king of Rohan right now, but Adrahil survives longer. I think he lives to the year 3000 and something, so he's got another 20 years in him yet. But anyway, so he's the faction leader at the start because we're early enough for him to be, and Imrahil is but a lowly heir named Lord. The only real lore twist or lore anything that we've given to Dol Amroth is the inclusion of something called the Order of the Swan. Read into that what you would if you're in the Discord. And it is only known in the game through the Warriors Guild, being this second tier of the building, and then a third, the Brotherhood of the Talon. And essentially what we've gone for is that whilst Dol Amroth is ruled by a prince, there's also a noble class of pure blooded Númenóreans who see themselves as better than those of middlemen mixed origin, who essentially came to rule over Dol Amroth in all but name because of the prince. So one of those situations where there is a person who is the de jure ruler of the town, the legal ruler, but there are those who are the actual, in fact, de facto rulers. And that's what I went for. I say I because I wrote these. Way back when I was the only person on the mod. So a long time ago, very long time ago, like 3 years. Anyway, so the idea was that Dol Amroth was ruled by the prince, but these ruling nobles, this council, the Order of the Swan, came to actually rule the city, and they were the generals, the nobles, the merchants. And over time they grew fat and greedy, but now Dol Amroth is thrown into a war for its very survival. They turn to warfare once again, and the Order of the Swan is now actually a noble order that sees to the defence and betterment of Dol Amroth in these trying times as Sauron tries to wipe them off the face of the earth. There's also a higher tier of that, almost a shadow controlling the order, known as the Brotherhood of the Talon, which is represented by the third tier of the building. And again, it follows that same pattern. So you have the Prince of Dol Amroth, then you have the Order of the Swan, who are the ruling council, and then hidden amongst them and unbeknownst to them is actually the ruling structure of, say, 5 important people who make up the Brotherhood of the Talon, a secretive, shadowy order who actually control the city. But interestingly, and against most other types of fiction, I opted for the Prince being a part of that. So even though it looks like the Order of the Swan has actual day-to-day ruling, the Prince is one of these 5 hidden actual rulers, the people actually pulling the strings. And that was the only real addition to Dol Amroth's lore that we've written in. So they very much perform the same role that they perform in the limited military excerpt we have of them from the book, in that they have excellent heavy cavalry. Because, of course, Imrahil's knights famously charge out of the gates of Minas Tirith twice, as I've already mentioned, and they are famous for being these incredible knights. And so those are represented by the Knights of the Silver Swan, and think units like the Royal Swan Guard. We've also then expanded on that idea to make them also just in general an overall good cavalry faction. And then, as I say, taking on the idea that they're the best in Gondor, their general units are generally better than all the others. So, and I said so, but that's not led to anything, because I think that's pretty much it, I'm afraid. Pretty much it. Separate my words better. We haven't changed much of Dol Amroth because there's not much to make up for them. So unlike places like Dorwinion and the videos that have come before this, the first half of this video is considerably longer than the second because we haven't had to include anything for Dol Amroth. And in terms of the geography, we haven't really changed up the lands that they're in at all or invented anything. Gondor is a very heavily populated region, so it is no stretch at all to add 2 towns to Belfalas, because there would be many towns here. And I believe, in fact, Linhir is actually one that is mentioned in the text itself in The Lord of the Rings story, and not a fan fiction town. I'm fairly certain that this is where Aragorn meets... I can't remember his name because I've completely forgotten it. It's going to really bug me. But anyway, the gentleman who is leading the defence of southern Gondor, who Aragorn meets with the army of the dead and then takes the name the Fearless, because he's the only one that stands before the army of the dead. I'm fairly certain that Linhir is where they meet, although I think they do meet at the mouth of the Andrin. Anyway, I'm just guessing and just extending the video for no reason. So that's pretty much it. So I do hope you've enjoyed this little lore meets faction overview, and that you may have learned something new about Dol Amroth, and you may indeed have been inspired to play as Dol Amroth, because as Divide and Conquer goes, they're definitely the best faction, hands down. I'm not speaking bias at all, and I haven't put extra attention into their roster or treated them like they are a child at any stage, because why would you do that for a faction in a game? That's just silly. But I do hope you've enjoyed the episode, and until we speak again, dear friends, Navar Naden Perimad Melunin, and farewell.